Today's video is about biography of Angela Carter. She was an author, journalist and professor who reshaped motifs from mythology, legends and fairy tales in her books, lending them a terrible humor and eroticism. She also wrote radio plays, children's books and essays. Her writing made her place among the most highly regarded British writers of the end of 20th century. Let's know more about her by starting with her childhood and early life. Angela Carter, whose original name was Angela Olive Stalker, was born on May 7, 1940 in Eastbourne, Sussex. Her mother, Sophia Olive, was from South Oakshire and worked as a cashier at Selfridges. And father, Hugh Alexander Stalker, was from Scotland, who worked as a journalist and was in his mid-40s when Angela was born. He became the main source of inspiration for young Carter to pursue journalism later in her life. Now, because Eastbourne was located close to English Channel, it was also close to German army stationed along French coast during World War II. So, when the World War II broke out, Carter and her mother, brother and grandmother moved to South Yorkshire to avoid being caught in German air attacks on England. Throughout her teenage years, she suffered extreme eating disorder named anorexia nervosa, for which she was heckled at many occasions. After the war, the family moved to Balham in South London, where Carter went to school at Streatham and Clapham High School. Then she began to work as a journalist on the Cordian Advertiser, following her father's footsteps. Later, in 1960, at the age of 20, Angela married Paul Carter. Then they moved to Bristol, where in 1965, Carter graduated from Bristol University with a degree in English literature. Further, about her work and career. In 1966, she published her first novel, Shadow Dance, which was also published as Honey Buzzard. Following this, in 1967, she published The Magic Toy Shop, and in 1968, several Perceptions. For The Magic Toy Shop, Carter received her Llewellyn Rice Memorial Prize, and it was also later filmed by director David Whitley. And for several Perceptions, she won the Somerset Maugham Award. Also, in 1968, Carter separated from her husband. Then she published her fourth novel, Heroes and Villains. Angela used her money she received for her books to travel to Japan, to experience life in a culture that is not Judeo-Christian. She lived and worked as a reporter for almost 3 years, from 1969 to 1972. In 1972, Angela divorced Paul Carter, and she bookended this by writing Love and the Infernal Desire Machines of Dr. Harfun. After this, in 1974, she published her first collection of short stories called Fireworks, which was partly inspired by her stay in Japan. A year later, in 1975, she began to write regularly for the British political weekly magazine News Society. Then, between 1976 and 1978, she worked as a fellow in creative writing at Sheffield University. Then, in 1977, Carter married Mark Pierce and settled in Clapham in South London. After this, in 1978, Angela Carter wrote a controversial essay, The Sadian Woman and the Ideology of Pornography. In the essay, she offered a positive interpretation of the works of the Marquis de Sade. She argued that Marquis de Sade was one of the first writers who viewed the function of women as something that transcended the function of producing babies. In 1979, she published her second collection of a short fiction book, The Bloody Chambers, and Other Stories. It became one of her most significant works, winning the Cheltenham Festival Literary Prize in the same year of its publication. The novel earned heavy acclaim from numerous critics and readers, so this was one of her major works. Then, her fictional stories, The Werewolf and the Company of Wolves are variations of Charles Perrault's fairy tale named Little Red Riding Hood. This twist earned her reputation of being her era's Mother Goose, though a much darker version. Later, The Company of Wolves was also adapted for films. Then Carter continued to exploit traditional tales, exposing the nature of storytelling. Between 1980 and 1981, she worked as a visiting professor in the writing program at Brown University in the United States. In November 1983, when she was 43, she gave birth to her son, Alexander Pierce. Despite the birth of her child between 1984 and 1988, Carter led a nomadic life. Being there, she published Nights at the Circus, Black Winners, Come On to This Yellow Sands, 4 radio plays. Plus, for 3 years, she taught part-time at England's University of East Anglia. In 1984, she was also a writer in residence at the University of Adelaide, South Australia. The same year, she helped in the production of the movie The Company of Wolves. Then, Nights at the Circus, published in 1984, was honored with the James Tait Black Memorial Prize for the category of fiction. The book is regarded as one of her best-known works because it integrates facets of post-feminism, postmodernism, and magical realism. The popularity of the novel spawned a stage adaptation by Tom Morris and Emma Rice in 2006. And in 1987, she was involved in aiding the production of the film adaptation of her popular novel, The Magic Toy Shop. Now, in Carter's last years, she published in 1991 her last novel, Wise Children, which she considered her favorite, is a surreal wild ride through British theatre and music traditions. The same year, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. Angela Carter died a year later at her home on Feb 16 at the age of 51. At the time of her death, she had begun writing a sketch for the sequel of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, based on the life of Jane's granddaughter. However, due to her ultimate death, the project was unfinished and only a pieces of the same survive today. After her death in 1993, her fourth collection of short stories, American Ghost and Old War Wonders, was published. And in 1995, her last one, Burning Your Boots, was seen in prints. Before her death, Carter provided extensive direction on how to deal with her literary collection. Her main concerns were related to her husband and her son. She desired for her work to provide an income for them, stating that any one of her 15 books could be set to music or acted on ice. Angela Carter's experiment with narrative form and her use of fairy tales and real-life characters may have been the reason, as Salman Rushdie writes in his introduction to Burning Your Boots, that she was dismissed by many in her lifetime as marginal, cultish figure and an exotic hothouse flower. Since her death, however, Carter has become, at British universities, one of the most studied of late 20th century writers. Moving further, let's examine her work in critical context. Well, many critics describe her as a prolific writer. It's seen that during Carter's life and after her death in 1992, literary critics try to decide on the literary trend to which her work belongs. Some perceive her as a writer of the Gothic, others associate her with magic realism, where Gothic is characterized by mystery, horror, and gloom, and magic realism is a style of fiction that sets story in everyday world, while incorporating strange and unbelievable details. Her short stories, however, are distinctly postmodern in its re-examination of folklore and other traditional sources. Her work is also informed by feminism, although Carter has attributed her feminist status to the simple fact that, as a woman, she writes from female point of view. As the critical responses to Carter's work multiply and the debate over its meaning and significance grow, however, it has become clear that her writing is more complex. At the end, the great irony of Carter's work is not just that she was a prolific author who died young of an old person's disease, but that her very subject which marginalized her as a cult author during her lifetime today hold worthy of blockbuster Broadway musicals, prime-time television series, Oscar-winning films, and one of the most commercial successful subgenres in the history of fiction. Many of Angela Carter's works are not listed here. I will post her works in a list-wise manner and will also add some questions on our Telegram channel at English Cherry. We will be pleased if you visit us. So that's it for this video. See you next time. If you like my video and wish to support me, then please like, share and subscribe. Thank you.